Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Pat Fitzmaurice and by Jake Ciely. Guys, we are talking free agency predictions today. Now, just to let everybody know, we are taping this before the Super Bowl has happened, because the week after the Super Bowl, Fitz and I are on the team trip. We are going to be hanging out with our coworkers in person all week. So we are pre-recording this. The reason I am mentioning that is because we are obviously not going to be mentioning who won the Super Bowl or any possible takeaways from that. So I want to be clear that we are not just forgetting about the biggest game of the year. We are taping this early, in fact. Jake, this is the first show I've done with you. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's kind of something that's near and dear to The Athletic. When I have this in mid-March, I always have the article about free agency, so like the impacts. So you have me already in my mind is this stuff.
There's really no offseason. It never sleeps with the NFL. You know, we're already jumping into thinking about what 2025 might look like. It's a super fun conversation always. Fitz, how are you doing? I feel like I haven't done a show with you in a minute.
I'm doing well, and I'm just bummed we can't talk about the Super Bowl and recap Sky Moore's 200-yard game for the Chiefs. But I'm sure it's going to be a good game, or was a good game, since we're talking about this in the future.
Congrats, Eagles.
Yeah. Do you guys have are you pulling for the Eagles just because you don't want to see the three-peat, just since we're still ahead of it?
I go. Are you Fitz?
Go ahead.
Are you going for no?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I could go either way.
I'm neutral.
Yeah, I'm like, but I actually think the Eagles will or did win, because I just go back to 2 years ago and how close it was, and just now the fact that they've been here a second time around and they didn't have Saquon Barkley and didn't have a defense, and now watch, while we're recording this, they probably lost 31-10 or something like that.
We're gonna pretend that we're correct as of right now. Just to let everybody know, as we get into kind of our 2025 thinking, all of our consensus rankings and tiers, as they are updated throughout the offseason, can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Again, we are taping this early, so we're kind of if there's any stuff that happens between now and the Super Bowl, any news updates that would change any of these, this is early, the week before that game. Let's dive in. We're going to go 6-1 from each analyst, going from kind of least confident to most confident free agency predictions, picking a player where we think they're going to end up. We can pick players that are going to stay with their same team, so you might see some of that, but you'll also see some players jumping around in our predictions. Jake, let's start with you as the guest. Your number 6 prediction. What do you got?
Yeah, I got Sam Darnold leaving the Vikings, and I have Sam Darnold in my mind of what are the options. You've heard Jets, Giants, and stuff like that, going back to the Jets. But I think there's a team that makes a lot of sense that doesn't seem to get a lot of attention, and it's possibly because what people are thinking draft-wise if Shedeur Sanders falls to the Raiders. But I actually think if you're bringing in Pete Carroll's not coming in with a 10-year plan or even a 7-year plan or even a 5-year plan. Pete Carroll's coming in to turn this organization around, hopefully in 1 year, maybe 2 at the most. And I think Sam Darnold actually profiles a lot like what is a Pete Carroll quarterback. Hint, hint, there's another player that I have going to the Raiders and try to get that quick turnaround. And I think if you're looking what the Raiders situation is in and having the money to be able to do this and not hope that one of the 2 quarterbacks falls to them, the 2 being Ward and Sanders, I think Sam Darnold to the Raiders makes a lot of sense. And I initially thought the Vikings might pull the franchise just because JJ McCarthy might not be ready for week 1. But the more we look into it and hear beat reporters covering the Vikings, it sounds like they don't want to invest that much money even for a 1-year deal, given the way that their roster is constructed. So I think Sam Darnold to the Raiders would be and it's my least confident, but I'm still pretty confident in it.
Would you feel confident ranking Sam Darnold if this happens? Would you be interested in investing in him in fantasy? I mean, if they don't take a quarterback with that, early pick, maybe they take like a Ted McMillan or some other kind of pass catcher for Vegas at number 6 overall. And then you've got Brock Bowers, you've got, Jacoby Myers. Is that a situation to be interested in Sam Darnold stepping into?
Sam Darnold in that situation would fall to, so right now, lean over. I have my way too early rankings. I've been working on those for the day after the Super Bowl, which are already out now because technically this is, but I had Darnold just around 16, 17, assuming he was back with the Vikings. I would knock him down to probably like the tier because it's still the Raiders. If they draft McMillan, that'd be great. But I go back to the Pete Carroll thing. Is the Pete Carroll offense is still going to be more run balanced? Hint, hint again. And I just think that this would be a little bit more conservative game plan than what you see with the Vikings. And it's not Jefferson. And yeah, I mean, I love McMillan, but it's not Jefferson and Addison and all the rest. It's a rookie, and Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, I'd probably put a tier below.
Fitz, what do you think about this potential match?
I like it, and I like Jake's reasoning on the Pete Carroll thing. It does maybe make more sense for the Raiders to go out and get a veteran quarterback. And I'd actually be pretty bullish on that as a landing spot. Like, I think it might bode well for Darnold's fantasy value because the Raiders' new offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, really likes to push the pace. Darnold would probably be among the league leaders in pass attempts, I would imagine, in the Chip Kelly offense. So, to me, that might put him like high-end QB2 territory.
Okay. Fitz, what's your number 6 prediction?
Chris Godwin to the Cardinals. Now, as well as Jalen McMillan played for the Buccaneers down the stretch last season, it seems unlikely that Godwin would stay with the Buccaneers. Can we get the Cardinals a real slot receiver, one not named Rondale Moore or Greg Dortch? Like, I know Godwin is coming off a significant foot injury, but he would need to be a 10-target-a-game guy on a team that already has Trey McBride at tight end and Marvin Harrison Jr. as an outside receiver. Cardinals have a lot of salary cap space, 4th most, I think, according to Over the Cap. So if Kyler Murray is McBride at tight end, Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson as the outside receivers, and Chris Godwin in the slot, that's a pretty nice group. And with that sort of pass-catching arsenal, I think it would be fair for the Cardinals to make 2025 a sort of referendum season for Kyler Murray. He still has a few years left on his contract before the Cardinals have to or have some sort of reasonable escape hatch. But if Kyler can't get it done with a McBride, Godwin, Harrison trio, maybe it's time to start drawing up some sort of succession plans at the QB position.
Yeah, Jake, what would your reaction be to seeing this kind of fit?
Well, there goes my excitement about Marvin Harrison being top 20 next year. Like, I'm in for Marvin Harrison as a buy low off of what happened this past season. But I think you bring in Godwin, and the biggest concern you have for Kyler Murray is the same. This has nothing to do with this conversation, but when I was talking about Bryce Young on podcast earlier this year and the fact that Adam Thielen's return coincided with what Bryce Young, but also Kyler Murray and Drew Brees years ago, what they need slot options, reliable slot options, because you have to work the pocket different when you're short. It's the real thing. Like, height matters, and it also doesn't matter. But when it does matter is you have to work and find lanes to throw to instead of throwing over what you can see with the offensive line standing in front of you, which a Chris Godwin would be perfect for Kyler Murray. And that's where I go to it, is if you have Kyler with Godwin and McBride and Marvin Harrison, I actually feel like Marvin Harrison might be the least valuable of them. So I like the fit, but I feel bad for Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, I would be much more optimistic about what it does for Kyler than I would be for any of these receivers, right? Yep. I mean, I would be more interested in Kyler than I am right now in terms of drafting him for next season. But yeah, it would be tough to kind of. And Godwin was so good before he got hurt this year. He was just having such a great season. Such a disappointment to see that injury. I do want to let everybody know that if you want a chance to win a signed Mike Evans Buccaneers helmet for free, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com, all you need to do is head to fantasypros.com/contest, complete the form, and either download the Fantasy Pros My Playbook app, leave a review for the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at Fantasy Pros. The more actions you complete, the more entries you receive. We will be announcing a winner right here on the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. Again, that's a signed Mike Evans Buccaneers helmet for free, courtesy of pristineauction.com. All right, Jake, what's your number 5 prediction?
So number 5 might not be super exciting for people to hear, but I feel like this is a good fit, and what the Chargers are doing at running back. And what is a team similar to what you just saw last year, is a team that might take a chance on somebody coming off an injury and given what he could do, and also understanding might not be ready to be 100% at the beginning of the season. And I think Nick Chubb looking for a new team next year fits with like the Harbaugh, what we just saw with Dobbins, maybe is big in the second half of the season. And I don't think he'd be the only solution, I should say. But if J.K. Dobbins a free agent, and I could see the Chargers saying, you know what, it's great that you revitalized your career. Dobbins goes for hopefully a big contract on his end, but the Chargers are like, well, then we'll let you have that because I'm Harbaugh, I'm Roman. Like, we can do things with other running backs and get Chubb on the cheap. So I could see that as a good fit for him, because it's hard to find too many teams where you could find a team that can wait and be patient, also give a spot for Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I thought this was a really good fit, and especially the point you made about we just saw this a year ago with them taking on J.K. Dobbins and being willing to take a chance on a guy coming off like a very crushing injury. Seeing it happen again, I don't think would be surprising at all, especially just given kind of the culture of this team. Fitz, Nick Chubb on the Chargers. Would you like that or not?
I would, although my dream is Ashton Genty somehow falling to the Chargers, but I don't think he's probably going to fall that far into the first round. So, yeah, I like it. And hopefully we see a different and more effective Nick Chubb this fall when he'll be nearly 2 full years removed from that devastating injury, because he just didn't have the same juice last year. But then again, I don't know if a lot of us expected him to.
Yeah. What's your number 5 prediction, Fitz?
I'm going to go with Stefon Diggs to the Patriots. The Patriots are just so thin at wide receiver that they will probably have to sign at least one and draft at least one. But New England does have a vast fortune to spend in free agency. So let's send Diggs back to the AFC East, but this time in New England instead of Buffalo. And when Diggs joined the Bills in 2020, he helped Josh Allen become a superstar. Like, that was the breakthrough season for Josh Allen. In 2019, Allen had 3,000 passing yards, 20 TD passes. Then Diggs showed up in Buffalo, and in 2020, Allen had 4,500 passing yards, 37 TD passes. So maybe Diggs can help Drake May make a similar leap from toolsy prospect to NFL star. And of course, I realize different circumstances now. Diggs was 26 when he signed with the Bills in 2020. Now he's 31 and coming off a torn ACL, but he should be ready to go early in the 2025 season, if not for the start of it. And I think a crafty route runner like Diggs would be a pretty good fit for Josh McDaniels' system in New England.
Fitz, it just kind of been talking through these first few names and looking at the names that are still to come on this show. It's a lot of guys on the wrong side of 30. It's a lot of guys coming off injuries. Do you see this as a weak free agency class overall?
I mean, overall, or are we just talking about wide receiver?
Just in general, just overall, do you view it as a strong free agency class where you can, if you're an NFL team, you can plug a lot of holes and there's exciting, opportunities for new guys for fantasy, or is it just kind of a down, like less exciting class in general?
I mean, for skill players, it's probably a down class. Like, they're not. Look how many running backs changed teams. Although I realize some of them were trades, but I know last year was a pretty good running back free agent class. It does seem like it's a lot of guys on the wrong part of the bell curve as far as their career arc at wide receiver, and not a real great draft class at wide receiver. Running back's going to be interesting because the running back market has been pretty soft in free agency the last few years, and now we've got this monster class coming in. I forget who said it, but I remember someone mentioning on Twitter that they thought it was basically the talent of 2 running back classes packed into one class. And so I don't know what guys like Jaylen Warren are going to find when they hit the open market, So, yeah, I mean, it's not a real lustrous free agent crop, at least for fantasy managers.
Well, speaking of those running backs, Jake, what's your next prediction?
Yeah, the hint is here now. Number 4, Najee Harris to the Raiders. Go back to the Pete Carroll situation. If you're looking for somebody who has a lot of the makeup of a Kenneth Walker, Walker was brought in with Pete Carroll there. I think that there's similarities in that pretty good pass catchers, but really good between the tackles. And I know the complaints in fantasy for us was that, it's, volume and Jaylen Warren looks better. Why don't they give more to Warren? But the fact is Najee Harris is still a really good running back. It just has some limitations. Not everybody is on the tier of Saquon Barkley and the rest. So I think the fit of, again, what the Raiders are trying to do here is Zamir White, that wasn't anything this year. That backfield had some with Amir Abdullah at the end of the season, and Alexander Madison is not the answer. So I think this is really Pete Carroll coming in, like I said, trying to remake this team quickly and say, let's get one more playoff run, hopefully, in my career at the end of it. And I actually go back to something Fitz said before, and I think that old Chip Kelly, this is where I'll disagree. Like old Chip Kelly, I would agree. I think the Ohio State Chip Kelly might be a little bit more run heavy, especially. And I know he had Henderson and Judkins, and that was a big factor of that. But I just think that you might get a little bit more balance with Chip Kelly and that being Najee Harris and a piece, whether it continues to be Madison as part of that piece or Abdullah, or maybe they draft somebody, because you are right. This is a ridiculous draft class for running backs. I think Najee Harris and Sam Darnold would do a lot for the Raiders, and then they can address the other side of the ball more so in the draft too. And free agency, to go back to your question you asked, Fitz, unfortunately, defense is actually, that's the answers. If you needed answers on defense, the free agent class is good there.
Yeah. I really like this fit with Harris to the Raiders. I was looking at our early 2025 consensus rankings, and Harris is RB25. He's at the top of tier 5. Or excuse me, he's RB27. He's at the top of tier 5. I will definitely be ranking him higher than that if he goes to the Raiders, just knowing what we know about Pete Carroll and the opportunity that's there in this offense. I like this fit a lot. Fitz, what do you think about it?
Yeah, maybe he can be Pete Carroll's Marshawn Lynch. And I know a lot of people wanted to make Sincere McCormick a thing in fantasy late last year. They do have him under contract very cheaply for 2025, but you can't go into the 2025 season with Sincere McCormick as your number one running back. So Najee isn't the flashiest dude, but he is a pretty reliable mail carrier and catches passes. Ultra durable, hasn't missed a single game in his 4 NFL seasons. So I would be on board with this.
He'll be 27 in March, so obviously that'll be his age for all of next season. If he goes to the Raiders, Fitz, put a number to it. Where do you think you'd have him ranked? Just obviously it's really early in that process, but if you had to guess.
Yeah, still probably low end RB2, like somewhere in the RB23 range, maybe.
Does that sound right to you, Jake?
I go a little bit higher. Like I'm looking right now at my ranks. It's funny you said 27, whereas I have him checked in, not knowing where he would go, but looking at names that I have right now, like Kenneth Walker's at 18. And I'd probably take him over Kenneth Walker, knowing the split that's with Seattle again. Montgomery's at 20 right now. Again, this is my rankings. There's another name that I'll save because we're going to talk about him at 21 right now. But it's a lot of shared backfield, some uncertainty where I just know the volume that he would probably get here, 300 touches. So I'd say mid RB2. Not that far from Fitz, but a little bit more aggressive.
Kind of last question on this range of running backs Fitz. Obviously, Ashton Genty, we would expect to be ranked higher than this, like pretty much irrespective of his landing spot. For some of those other guys in this class that we keep talking about as super strong, let's use Najee Harris theoretically on the Raiders as a barometer. Do you think guys like Omarion Hampton and Travion Henderson and Judkins or whoever it is that is kind of your RB2 du jour, would they be ranked ahead of Harris for you, or are they all kind of going to behind him and depending on landing spot?
I'm a big Omarion Hampton fan, so I would probably have him ahead of Najee. And then like on the Ohio State guys and maybe some of the other guys, like if someone lands in the dream spot, if someone lands on the Chargers, for instance, which might be the most attractive setup for any rookie running back, I might put them ahead of Najee Harris. But so far, only I think Genty and Hampton right now.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Jake? I'm not sure how much you've dived into the class yet.
No, that's actually the next thing after the free agents is what I'm always doing. But I have some of my early rookie running back rankings. And so to give you an idea, I have Genty inside my top 10. But then as of doing my preseason ranking or off-season rankings, I have Hampton, Johnson, Henderson, and Judkins all back to back to back to back. Kind of to your point, right now they're in the mid-20s because they could end up in a spot where they'll jump inside the top 20, even pushing top 15, like, Fitz brought up. Maybe what if Genty doesn't go to the Cowboys like everybody expects, and one of them goes to the Cowboys? So you can see that, or you can see some of them end up in timeshares. So I think any of those four, in my opinion, could be fringe RB1s, top end RB2s, but all four of them could also be timeshares and kind of like a low end RB2, RB3.
Yeah, it could be similar to like Charbonnet, where coming in there was a lot of interest in him, and then he goes to Seattle, and all of a sudden, value's nuked. All right, Fitz, what's your number 4 prediction?
DeAndre Hopkins to the Chargers, and it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where some of these veteran outside receivers are going to land in free agency. T. Higgins is the headliner, of course, but then you've got Hopkins, Diggs, Amari Cooper. We were just talking about the age thing and how some of these guys are maybe on the wrong side of the age bell curve for wide receivers. But there are quite a few teams that could use a veteran outside receiver: the Patriots, the Steelers, the Commanders, the Panthers, the Raiders, the Titans. But not a lot of those teams are ready to contend for a Super Bowl. One team that I think could contend for a Super Bowl appearance and needs a veteran outside receiver, the Chargers. So Hopkins is going into his age 33 season, probably only has another bite or two at the apple. Let's put DeAndre Hopkins on the ascendant Chargers and let him finish his career with Justin Herbert, an ultra-talented quarterback who's just entering his prime. Chargers already have the terrific Ladd McConkey in the slot, but they are weak on the outside. I think Quentin Johnston has been obviously pretty inconsistent and drop prone. He may never become the player the Chargers hoped he would be. So sign DeAndre Hopkins. draft a tight end in the first round, either Tyler Warren or, more likely, since he played with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, Colston Loveland, and draft another outside receiver on day 3 as a developmental prospect. Chargers have some money to spend in free agency. I don't think they'd have to break the bank for a receiver who's in the twilight of his career. I think this pairing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it is funny to think about, like, oh, DeAndre Hopkins, a guy who wants to get a ring. He may be coming off a Super Bowl victory as of the time this episode drops, but we don't know quite yet. DeAndre Hopkins in LA. Jake, do you like that fit?
I like the fit. I don't love it for fantasy. I think this is going to be a situation, and it had nothing to do with Justin Herbert, but I think Justin Herbert in now the Harbaugh/Roman offense isn't the Herbert where we were thinking, 4,500 yards and 30 plus touchdowns should be in play every single season. I think Ladd McConkey is the answer. And the worst scenario about it is I agree with Fitz. I love it. Draft Loveland too. But now it's like the only person I'm interested in is Ladd McConkey, and whatever's in the backfield is not trying to figure out which week Hopkins is going to hit, because that's the Hopkins we're dealing with right now. Is it's basically touchdown or bust most weeks. So I like the fit for real life. Fantasy wise, it would be pretty much no interest.
Yeah, a lot of my pairings are good for the quarterbacks, but not so good for the other pass catchers involved.
This one might actually be good for the other pass catcher, because I don't think Hopkins is going to take away from Ladd. So it would probably make me even more bullish on Ladd if this is the receiver investment that the Chargers choose to make. I don't think Hopkins is taking anything away from, especially what we saw in the back half of the season this year and in the playoff game. Like, McConkey's just really, really good. Who is scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking how many points your favorite player will have. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. The odds shifted a bit after the blockbuster Luka trade a couple of weeks ago, but the two favorites to win it all this season are Boston at plus 240 and OKC at plus 245. Next closest contender is Cleveland, all the way down at plus 900, paired with the Knicks at the same odds. Lines and odds are subject to change, of course, but for now, it looks like we're barreling towards a Thunder Celtics finals matchup. First time, here's something special for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, guys, we're into our top 3 predictions here for free agency 2025. Jake, what's your number 3?
Yeah, I felt really good about this after Ben Standig over The Athletic wrote up something and was talking about the Commanders' offseason plans. And one of them was the name that I was about to say. And I was talking about this a few weeks ago. I feel so good about this. Like, I'm going to victory lap the heck out of this if it happens. I was like, look at the Commanders. They need a number 2 wide receiver. There's no question about it. And if you look at it, Noah Brown, Diami Brown, Zacchaeus, I think at least 2 or 3 of them, or 2 out of the 3, even possibly all 3 are unrestricted free agents. I don't remember Noah Brown's exactly, but I think it might be all 3. But they need an answer because of those 3. Nobody was the true answer anyway. And I was like, a lot of people want to say maybe Hopkins, maybe they do something differently, another slot. And I was just looking at Terry McLaurin, who kind of plays not a true big slot, but kind of that range where he can move around. And I was saying, if you want to really unleash things for Jaden Daniels, I know Amari Cooper was the other name that was thrown out by Ben, but the name that I was throwing out that he also included was Hollywood Brown. I mean, you get that deep ball opened up too for Jaden Daniels, as we've already seen with McLaurin, but even more so with Hollywood Brown. And the real important thing that he brought up, and I know he's not the best. Actually, this is one area that Cooper is better than he is, but they're both decent in, is you also want somebody, the reason they went the Noah Brown route is somebody who can block as a number 2 wide receiver if needed. And Hollywood Brown is definitely not the worst. And I think he's just a really nice fit and checks all the boxes, but also checks the boxes where probably doesn't command as much as Cooper does in free agency. And being younger, but also coming off the injury just recently, I think a lot of factors here, maybe he's coming off a Super Bowl win and a Super Bowl ring, but I think he just fits all the boxes where the Commanders can also address other issues and not go too heavy like Cooper would command.
Fitz, what do you think about the fit of Hollywood Brown next to Terry McLaurin in that offense?
I like it. I mean, durability, obviously a big concern with Hollywood Brown, but giving Jaden Daniels a vertical receiver, especially with the way Jaden Daniels can buy time with his mobility. Good luck staying with Hollywood Brown for 5 seconds if Jaden Daniels gets loose and starts scrambling around. So that is an exciting pairing. It's just one of these years we need a fully healthy season from Hollywood Brown, especially when he's potentially paired with a good quarterback. That would be fun to see.
And the other thing too, sorry to jump back in. I was so excited about this. I forgot too. The other reason I was tying this together. Oh, by the way, Cliff Kingsbury with the Cardinals had Hollywood Brown. There's the connection there too as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. It's so funny. It's just how quickly some of these like long-term moribund franchises all of a sudden become really attractive landing spots for players. Just get the young core. We saw it with the Texans a year ago. We're seeing it with the Commanders this offseason. I expect just get the good, exciting quarterback, and talent will want to flock there. So yep. I like this fit a lot too. Fitz, your number 3 free agency prediction is one that we've talked about in a couple of shows here already. So I was not surprised to see you include it.
Yeah, Jake started the game of quarterback musical chairs with Sam Darnold to the Raiders. Let's put Justin Fields on the Jets. So the Jets do need some sort of plan B at quarterback in case Aaron Rodgers calls it quits. They're picking 7th in the draft, where they're pretty unlikely to get the quarterback of their choosing. And even if Rodgers doesn't call it quits, signing Fields might still make some sense. He's probably not going to command an exorbitant salary after being a backup last year. It could potentially serve as a backup for one more season or for as long as the Aaron Rodgers New York Jets marriage can last. And that would also reunite Justin Fields with Garrett Wilson, his old teammate at Ohio State. Wilson seemed pretty unhappy by the end of last season. This might be a good way to keep up his morale. And I still think Fields can be an above average starting quarterback. He has a good arm. He's extremely mobile. His biggest flaw as an NFL QB so far is that he just takes too many sacks. So if Fields can get better at sack avoidance, I mean, now we're cooking with gas.
What would you do with the rest of the players in this offense, Fitz? If let's say Rodgers is not there, just for the sake of argument, Fields is their week 1 starter. Are you bumping up Breece Hall? Are you bumping up Garrett Wilson just because he'll be happier? Are you maybe bumping them down actually because Fields doesn't have the best history of accuracy? Like, what are you doing with these other players?
Yeah, probably status quo for everyone but Garrett Wilson. I would have to give him a bump.
Okay. Fields to the Jets. Jake, do you like that?
Fantasy wise, it's funny that in my mind, the best fantasy solution is the Jets for a lot of reasons, for a lot of quarterbacks. But I would go for, and this was rumored when we're doing this show, but the whole like Saquon Barkley being like, hey, Jameis, why don't you go sign with the Giants? And to the New York teams, I would rather Winston go to the Jets too. So it's whether Winston, Fields, or whoever it might be, even though I don't think they're going to reconnect with Darnold. I think anybody that's with the Jets, if it's no Aaron Rodgers, I think would be a positive for us in fantasy. So I would like Fields there. I think he deserves another chance in the NFL, but I would like a lot of quarterbacks. Is my point here, is that I would like a lot of them if they ended up with the Jets, given their weapons.
Jake, let's stick with you for your number 2 free agency prediction.
Yeah, maybe this one's a little bit wish casting, but I'm sending T. Higgins to the Jaguars because, again, connections being made. Look, we have Liam Cohen coming in, Duval, and then we've already heard at this time it might have happened, the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach over with the Rams. I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name. It's like Shellhazy or something, like whatever. If that happened, you get the passing game narrowed down a lot to 2 or third option, but a very aggressive passing game coming from McVay. But going back to this is like, if you're going to get Trevor Lawrence to work, Gabe Davis is not the answer. Christian Kirk can't stay healthy, similar to the Hollywood Brown situation. I think he's better served at this point just being the number 3 answer. So what's the answer at number 2? The Jaguars have money, as we know. You bring in T. Higgins. Oh, by the way, what was the best Trevor Lawrence we've ever seen? College. Who was he playing with in college? Oh, T. Higgins. Let's put them back together. Let's open up this offense with Brian Thomas, T. Higgins, and get Trevor Lawrence to that generational talent that we were all wrong about so far to this point of his career. I know a lot of people want to put T. Higgins in New England, and it makes sense because of all their money. But I think that if I'm T. Higgins, like just thinking this again, I go play with Trevor Lawrence. Liam Cohen's a hot name. I see him as the head coach. I see the Jaguars, as much as things have gone wrong. If you told me which roster looks closer to an actually contending roster, I would say Jaguars over the Patriots, just in my opinion. So I think there's a lot that could go right with the Jaguars with the right coaching staff and the right pieces put in place. And I think one of them is T. Higgins.
Man, I'm mad at myself that when I saw you put this in the show sheet, T. Higgins, the Jags, that my first thought wasn't the reunion with Trevor Lawrence. Like my thought was, oh, Liam Cohen, like maybe you can use him the same way as Mike Evans. Like I didn't even think about the Clemson connection. So
Yeah.
that's that now seems very obvious now that you mentioned it, but I love that a fit in that regard. Fitz, T. Higgins is like the crown jewel of this class. I talked about how maybe it's a kind of a down free agency class. It's not the case with T. Higgins. He's obviously a very talented player when he's on the field. Is the Jaguars, to you, the best landing spot for T. Higgins, or is there another team that if you were picking a prediction for T, you would have gone with?
Yeah, not the Patriots, Jake, the team that desperately needs a wide receiver and has the most salary cap space in the league. Can't we throw Drake May a bone here? No, like
give him Hopkins.
Yeah, I mean, Jake's reasoning makes a lot of sense, and this could help fully unlock Trevor Lawrence, and the T. Higgins Lawrence pairing would be really cool. And suddenly this, looks a little bit like the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins triumvirate in Cincinnati. The only thing is when Jake and I did the show a few weeks ago where we were talking about like who we've got as first round picks next year, I think both of us had Brian Thomas Jr. inside round one.
This would hurt.
I think this would pretty much knock Brian Thomas Jr. out of round.
Oh, this is painful for me. Like I said, I got the signed football right behind me. Like as a Brian Thomas Jr. person, like I want it and don't want it at the same time.
Yeah.
I in this scenario would be really hoping to get, assuming the hype isn't too much for him, I would be hoping to get Trevor Lawrence in a lot of my leagues if he's thrown to both those two guys with Liam Cohen as head coach. That would be super fun, at least for the quarterback perspective. Fitz, what is your number 2 prediction?
This is certainly not as sexy as T. Higgins to the Jaguars, but Amari Cooper to the Steelers. The Steelers badly need more firepower at wide receiver. They still don't know what they have in Roman Wilson, their third-round pick from last year. They brought in Mike Williams during the season. He didn't really offer much help, and now he's going to be an unrestricted free agent again. The one blue-chip asset the Steelers have at wide receiver right now is George Pickens, who is abundantly talented, but also troublingly immature. Now, Amari Cooper's had a very good 10-year career. Sure, he's probably not the player he was in his prime, but still only 30 years old, and he did have a 1,200-yard season in 2023. Also, I think Cooper could serve as sort of a role model for Pickens. By all account, Cooper has been a really good teammate wherever he's been. Certainly not a diva type on the field. The Bills traded for Amari Cooper last year and then sort of grossly underutilized him. Cooper didn't complain. Like in the days before the Bills lost to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, Cooper told the media he wasn't unhappy with his role and was just grateful to be on a winning team. So Amari Cooper would give the Steelers some much-needed stability at wide receiver. He and Pickens both have X-receiver, Y-receiver versatility. I think it's a pretty good match.
Jake, what do you make of the disappointment from Amari Cooper after the trade to Buffalo? I was expecting a much bigger impact to just fantasy production for the team on the field, non-fantasy, like all of it. I was expecting him to make a bigger difference than he did.
I was too, honestly, mostly because Keon Coleman, we've seen the rawness there. We've seen, like, as much as I'm a Shakir guy, like he's not the answer to be their number one. And it's funny is there was a lot of these, looking through free agency and I'm like, man, who's the answer for the Bills? And it just seems stylistically fit is the answer really comes down to is they don't need anybody to be like the guy. And I think that's just what happened is that Cooper kind of had some redundancies to Shakir, had some redundancies to everything else. And as Fitz said, he was just out there happy to be on a team and playing good football because he's that kind of guy. But I think it's just the Bills were just like, yeah, we don't really have we don't need to force you into the number one role. You can do what we do. And that's why I kind of steered away from them with a lot of the wide receiver predictions. It's just, maybe they grab one, but maybe lower level. I just don't know that they're in a place where they are concerned. Like Stefon Diggs, when Fitz brought that up earlier, Stefon Diggs was the answer to help unlock Josh Allen early in his career. I think at this point, it's now Josh Allen doesn't need a Diggs anymore.
Yeah. What would you make of Cooper in Pittsburgh, Jake?
I like it. I think it comes down to who the quarterback is. Even if it's Russ, I wouldn't mind him as a 4 at this point of his career, but also just because Russell Wilson can do 3,300 yards, but it's not going to be a high octane, high passing offense. So I like it. It would be okay for fantasy. It wouldn't be one of the best. It wouldn't be one of the worst. So I think it's okay. At least, hey, it's better than he was with the Bills.
Yeah. Hard to be worse. All right, Jake, your number one free agency prediction for 2025.
Yeah, we're supposed to be going from least to most confident, and admittedly, like Higgins is kind of like, I'm like, again, wish casting. That's the most confident. I'd probably put him lower down, but this is my most confident, and it's kind of boring for everybody out there in fantasy. But I think Aaron Jones returning to the Vikings is just going to happen. You look at the Vikings now. I go back to the whole Sam Darnold situation about the contracts and everything, and how this roster is constructed. Maybe they try to wait, and Aaron Jones happens after the draft, depending on if somebody fell to them. I could see the Vikings being like, oh, somebody blank is still on the board in the third round because of how deep this draft class is. And maybe they pivot at that point. But I think that if you're looking to run most of everything back, and whether or not it's McCarthy is the answer week one or whatever it might be, I think they are just, why not run everything back on the offense? There's not a whole lot of stuff that you can do to improve what you have there. And instead of going out one of the big names like Najee Harris, they don't need Najee Harris. They don't need to risk J.K. Dobbins and hopefully that he could be slightly better, because Aaron Jones was good with the Vikings and he can be good again. And I think that that's just a very easy, let's just make everything work again. I think he's probably happy there, because why not?
What do you think about this one, Fitz?
I'd love to see Aaron Jones stay with the Vikings. I mean, I say that as a Green Bay Packers fan who doesn't love seeing, a great ex-Packer playing with the hated rival, but it just worked. Like, he thrived in Kevin O'Connell's system. 1,100 rushing yards, 51 catches, 400 receiving yards. Aaron Jones even stayed healthy and didn't miss a game. So I'm with Jake. Let's run it back.
Yeah, I think I'm counting now 12 double-digit scoring games in half PPR for him this year. Where, Jake, do you have Jones ranked in your way too early rankings?
21. Mid-low RB2. Like, I would take Breece Hall and even the questions there above him. I would take Kenneth Walker to go back to that split, because similar splits, but Walker has a slightly higher ceiling. There's one, could he just stay healthy? Maybe this is the year that he finally does. James Conner, if he stays healthy, but James Conner, even if I only get 12 games, we've seen James Conner put up fringe RB1 numbers. So it's Aaron Jones feels more like, hey, I took a gamble at my other running back, or I went wide receiver heavy, and that's where I'm going to be taking Aaron Jones. It's like, cool, I got my consistency, but I understand that there's going to be a limited ceiling.
What do you think for a ranking, Fitz?
I think I'm pretty much right in line with Jake, but that's sort of baking in the uncertainty of his free agency. And if he goes back to the Vikings, I'm probably going to tick him up a little bit to more mid RB2 range, perhaps.
All right, Fitz, you also, for your number one prediction, went with a guy staying with his team from this past year.
Yeah, this is not the most elegant prediction in the world, but like I do feel about 95% sure this is going to happen. It's Zach Ertz staying with the Commanders. And I just feel like this one is a layup. Ertz is 34, but he says he is not going to retire. And why would he? Like, he was fantastic for the Commanders down the stretch. 7 touchdowns in his last 10 games, 11 catches and 104 yards against the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. Ertz has talked about how he'd love to keep playing with Jaden Daniels, how he wishes he'd gotten to play with Daniels earlier in his career. The Commanders do have a pretty talented young tight end in Ben Sinnott, their second-round pick from last year, but Sinnott had 5 catches during the regular season, 1 catch in the playoffs. I don't know if the Commanders can count on him to play the sort of role that Ertz played this past season. So let's go one more time, run it back with the old guy, one more year. I don't think it would cost Washington a lot to re-up with Zach Ertz for one final season. Commanders have a lot of cap space. This wouldn't be hard. Let's get it done.
Jake, do you want to see this reunion?
For real life, yeah. And actually, I think without looking, I think Bates is a free agent too. So they're going to they're not going to just run out with Sonat as their only tight end next year. So yeah, Ertz makes a lot of sense. And he's saying all the right things. And I think it's part of you might see him sign one of those early deals of like a 1 year, $5 million just to stick around with this team and understand what he had. So prediction wise, yeah, this would be a high confidence level, but not a high fantasy excitement level.
Yeah. I will say I was surprised, again, in looking kind of at our early ECR, that he's tight end 20. If he returns to Washington, I'm not sure where I want to passionately make the case to move him up to specifically, but I feel like 20 is too low.
I think it would.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Fitz. This was your call.
I was just going to say like somewhere low end, tight end 1, high end, tight end 2 feels more right.
Yeah, I'm going to be down here in the 20s. Assuming something happens with the wide receiver 2 position. Now, if they run it back and just try to cobble together the wide receiver 2 position with McCaffrey in his second season and maybe some discounts, then I could be more in on that. But, looking at it right now, I would take Loveland, the rookie, over him just because it's ceiling. It's tight end. Like, I don't want tight end 14. And I could see him being tight end 14. Like, I want somebody who could potentially be top 7. So I would take a chance on both the rookies. I would take a chance Taysom Hill stays healthy and runs back his insanity. But I think Ertz is floor of all floors. Like, yeah, I'm going to get tight end 15, 14, but I'm not drafting tight end 14 or 15.
But I do think if you were going to punt the tight end position and not pay up, you could do worse than a combination of like Ertz and Loveland. Like one kind of upside.
Well, then let me give you
guy.
a question to you. Like, would you, as of right now, just a random one? Sorry to jump in and ask a question. Where I'm like, just going,
no.
Because I have him ranked higher. Would you go Cole Kmet with the new offense, or would you go Zach Ertz? Because I would just take a chance that Kmet with the new offense happened.
I'd probably go for Kmet too, with the way he made Laporta work as a rookie.
Yeah.
And I think Kmet is really good and just kind of got buried in that offense this year. So
Kmet's tight end 18 for the record in early ECR. Again, Zach Ertz, tight end 20. We actually have a minute. Jake, you gave an extra prediction just in case there was overlap with Fitz on Aaron Jones. It was about Javonte. I actually kind of want to hear you weigh in on that one too. So we have a moment. So a special 13th year prediction for the show.
a special 13th, just in case Fitz wanted to steal one of mine from me, is trying to find an answer for where Javonte Williams might go. Yeah, like I'm looking down, I'm looking through the rosters and say, you know what? And you're asking this because we just brought up the Bears, is Swift. Yeah, they spent on Swift. But I think we've seen what we already knew is that Swift is not a bell cow. Swift has his limitations. Swift is cool, but Swift also probably better with a decent option next to him. And the roster as it's constructed, I know people like Roschon Johnson, but I just don't think that's working. I think they're getting what they want from him. I just don't think it's working to the level of what we expected. I was high on Roschon Johnson too, to a degree. I expected more from him. But you take a flyer, like Javonte Williams flyer, he's not going to cost much of anything. I would assume he gets a 1-year contract, but you take a roster that has, you got to look at Javonte Williams as in like probably a newer coach or a coach with a backfield that has questions that doesn't, I'd say maybe the Chargers are in play here too, as just take a chance. He's going to be cheap. Maybe you resurrect his career. I think the Bears are a really nice fit for what he would bring alongside Swift and to that backfield with Caleb Williams under Ben Johnson.
Yeah, I wanted to squeeze this in because I just find Javonte so fascinating and where he lands and what my interest level is going to be. He's somebody that I similar to you, Jake, I think I would kind of struggle to pick like a perfect spot for him. So I'm really intrigued to see where he goes. Fitz, I know you loved Javonte maybe more than anybody pre that injury a couple of years ago. What would you think about this fit?
Yeah, I've said he's one of those guys who might go on my do not draft list this year, but I think the Bears are actually a landing spot that could kind of rekindle interest, because if the Bears did go out and sign anyone in free agency at running back, whether it was Javonte or Jalen Warren, like you'd have to feel pretty excited about Ben Johnson telling Ryan Poles, like, this guy would be a good fit for my system. Let's go get him. Right.
David Montgomery.
And I do. Yeah, exactly. And I do wonder if DeAndre Swift is going to be that guy for Ben Johnson, because he wasn't before. So, yeah, like that would definitely perk up my interest in Javonte.
All right, we gave everybody an extra prediction, so we'll wrap up there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks to Jake and Fitz for joining the show. We will be back throughout the offseason talking about other stuff. When the free agency frenzy actually happens, we'll be reacting to that as well. So stick with us throughout the offseason. For Jake and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next time. And go Birds. Hopefully that ages well.